Right now, privacy might be just a door away. You can close a room, lock a bathroom, put on headphones, turn off your phone, sleep in your own bed, walk away from people when you need silence. But now, take all of that away. No bedroom, no bathroom, no walls, no doors, no locks, no private screen, no place that belongs only to you. Just a small group of people sharing fire, food, shelter, danger, weather, children, stories, and survival. For the first Americans, life was not built around being alone. It was built around staying together. And that creates a strange question. In a world where people depended on each other for almost everything, did anyone ever get privacy? Did they even want it the way we do? Or is privacy something humans invented much later, after walls, houses, cities, and locked rooms? The answer is more interesting than it sounds, because privacy was not always a room. Sometimes privacy was a distance, a silence, a turned back, a walk beyond the firelight, a boundary everyone understood without writing it down. Let's open the field notes. Thousands of years before the United States existed, the first Americans lived in small groups moving through a changing continent. They followed seasons, watched animals, gathered food, made tools, protected children, shared shelters, shared fires, shared danger. And in that world, being alone was not always freedom. Sometimes being alone was risk. A modern person may feel safe behind a closed door. But in an ancient landscape, distance could be dangerous. A person alone could get injured, lost, cold, surprised by an animal, caught in weather, or separated from help. So the first thing to understand is this. The first Americans may not have thought about privacy the way we do. Modern privacy often means separation. A personal room, a personal device, a personal schedule, a personal life hidden from others. But ancient privacy may have been less about being completely alone and more about being respected inside the group. That difference matters, because in a small group, everyone knew almost everything. Who was hungry, who was sick, who was tired, who was angry, who was grieving, who was useful, who was careless, who needed help. There were fewer secrets because there were fewer hiding places. But that does not mean there were no boundaries. Humans have always needed boundaries. Even people who live closely together need moments of quiet, modesty, grief, affection, conflict, and thought. The question is not whether they had privacy. The question is what privacy looked like before walls. And the first form was probably space. Not a private bedroom, not a locked door, just enough distance, a few steps beyond the camp, a place behind brush, a path toward water, a quiet edge of the shelter, the far side of a rock, the shadow beyond the fire. In a world without rooms, the land itself became the room. Trees could create privacy. Hills could create privacy. Riverbanks could create privacy. Darkness could create privacy. The shape of the camp could create privacy. People did not need a door to understand that someone had stepped away for a reason. That small distance could say, "Do not follow. Do not stare. Do not ask." And because survival depended on social intelligence, people had to read those signs. In that world, privacy was not only built, it was understood. Another form of privacy was attention. Modern people think privacy means nobody can see you. But sometimes privacy means people choose not to look. That may sound simple, but it is powerful. In close living groups, there are moments everyone can notice. But everyone pretends not to. Someone crying quietly, a couple speaking softly, a parent correcting a child, a person changing clothing or repairing coverings, someone grieving, someone ashamed, someone who needs a moment away from the group without being questioned. Privacy can exist when people control their attention. Not every boundary needs a wall. Sometimes the boundary is social. A turned head, lowered eyes, a change in subject, a respectful silence, a decision not to interrupt. And in a small ancient group, that kind of social privacy may have mattered even more than physical privacy. Because people could not disappear for days. They still needed the group. They still needed the fire. They still needed protection. So privacy had to fit inside togetherness. That is very different from the modern world. Today, we often escape people to feel private. They may have needed people close in order to feel safe. And still, they found ways to create small personal spaces inside shared life. Think about sleeping. Today, sleep is usually private. A room, a bed, a door, a light you can turn off. But for the first Americans, sleep often meant closeness. People sleeping near fire, near family, near shelter, near warmth, near others who could wake if danger came. Children close to adults, the vulnerable protected near the center. Tools and food nearby. The edge of camp watched carefully. In that setting, sleeping alone would not feel peaceful. It might feel exposed. So privacy during sleep was not about being hidden in another room. It may have been about position, where someone slept, who they slept near, which side of the shelter they used, which coverings marked family space, which area belonged to elders, children, couples, or guests. Even without walls, repeated patterns create boundaries. If a family rests in the same corner night after night, that corner begins to mean something. If a person keeps tools in one place, that place becomes theirs. If a pair sits slightly apart by the fire, others understand. Humans are very good at turning habits into invisible lines. And invisible lines can be stronger than they look. Then there is the privacy of thought. This may be the hardest to imagine. The first Americans did not have phones, books, bedrooms, or long commutes alone. But they did have tasks that created mental space. Walking, tracking, gathering, fishing, scraping hides, making tools, watching children, carrying water, looking over the land, listening at night. These tasks were not always private in the physical sense, but they could create inward privacy. A person shaping stone may be surrounded by others, but still focused inside their own mind. A person walking behind the group may have silence. A person watching the horizon may be alone with memory. A person gathering plants may think about grief, anger, love, fear, or the future. Privacy is not always a hidden place. Sometimes it is an inner place. And humans have probably always had that. But some parts of life required more than inner privacy. Conflict, for example. In a small group, an argument could threaten everyone. If two people fought openly, it could split trust. If anger spread, cooperation weakened. So people needed ways to handle tension. Maybe an elder spoke privately with someone. Maybe two people walked away from the fire. Maybe the group allowed silence until emotions cooled. Maybe a conflict was handled through story, ritual, humor, or distance. We cannot know every custom, but we can know this. A group that cannot manage private tension becomes unstable. And in a dangerous world, unstable groups do not survive well. So emotional privacy mattered. Not because people were modern, because they were human. Grief needed space. Shame needed space. Love needed space. Anger needed space. Fear needed space. Fear needed space. And so did growing up. Children in ancient groups probably lived surrounded by people of many ages. They watched adults work. They learned by seeing. They heard stories. They copied movements. They understood social rules early because there was no separate world for children. But even children need boundaries. A child might learn when not to interrupt, when not to stare, when to stay close, when to leave adults alone, when a person's silence meant something. Privacy was not written as a rule on a wall. It was learned through watching, through correction, through story, through embarrassment, through imitation. This is how culture teaches without books. And then there is the question many modern people wonder about but rarely say out loud. What about couples? How did people have romantic life, marriage, affection, or private bonds without private rooms? The answer is probably the same as everything else. With timing, distance, custom, and social understanding. People could step away. Others could choose not to follow. A pair could speak softly. A camp could understand when space was needed. Night, landscape, shelters, and routines could create opportunities for privacy. Not perfect privacy, not modern privacy, but enough. Because humans do not need walls to understand intimacy. They need boundaries. And boundaries can be social as much as physical. This is why the question is bigger than it first appears. How did the first Americans have privacy? They had it through space, through silence, through habit, through respect, through the land, through body language, through shared rules, through people knowing when not to look. And maybe that tells us something about privacy today. Modern life gives us more private space than almost any humans before us. Separate rooms, separate beds, separate accounts, separate screens, separate lives. But many people are still watched, tracked, interrupted, distracted, and lonely. We have more walls, but not always more peace. The first Americans may have had less physical privacy, but they may have had something many people now struggle to find. A group that knew when you needed help, and when you needed space. That balance is difficult. Too much closeness can feel suffocating. Too much isolation can feel empty. Ancient people lived closer to the danger of both. They needed the group, but they also needed boundaries inside it. So maybe privacy did not begin with the invention of the room. Maybe it began much earlier, when one person stepped away from the fire and the others understood not to follow. When someone lowered their eyes. When a child learned to give space. When a couple disappeared beyond the edge of camp. When grief was allowed to sit quietly. When silence was respected. When the group understood that not everything shared must be spoken. So how did the first Americans have privacy? Not with doors, not with locks, not with bedrooms, not with screens. They had privacy through distance, timing, silence, custom, and trust. They lived close because they had to. But they made space because they were human. And maybe that is the field note we forgot. Privacy was never only about being alone. It was about being understood. That is one field note from humanity's oldest days.